Welcome to the Underground, the Steel City Underground, a Pittsburgh Steelers podcast made by fans like you, for fans like you. Now, here's your host, Joe Kuzma.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another edition of the Steel City Underground podcast. I am your host, Joe Kuzma, and welcome to a special bonus episode of the Steel City Underground podcast, because today I am going to talk about the information I did want to talk about when I had all of the technical difficulties recording the last show. Of course, I'm talking about the episode that was about nonsense and full of nonsense, and Ryan Shazier and that whole race he had with Antonio Brown and all of the other wide receivers, sans Darius Hayward-Bay, which is causing its own conspiracy. As I was talking to my buddy Eric Herman at Steelers Grind, told you I'd give you a little bit of a shout out, Eric. Thanks for helping me out with a little bit of the technical difficulties here. It's truly appreciated. And now I actually get to talk about something that I did want to talk about. And for those of you who may have been on Behind the Steel Curtain over at behindthesteelcurtain.com, part of SB Nation, my article dropped just recently about the Pittsburgh Steelers secret weapon that no one is talking about. And we're talking about a tight end, and we're talking about Jesse James, the fifth-round draft choice from the Pittsburgh Steelers in 2015, 1 year removed from his rookie season, which actually looked pretty disastrous from the onset. If you remember in the preseason, he had like a ball hit him in the face mask, and a ball hit him right in the numbers, and it was like, well, now I could see why this guy was probably a fifth-rounder, but the ship turned around, and I think things were looking a lot brighter for Jesse James. And, you know, it's kind of crazy because we really are picking apart every part of this team right now. Jesse James could be a backup tight end. He could be the third-string tight end. What if he's just – I don't think he's miserable, but if he had multiple games like he did in that Hall of Fame game last year, he probably doesn't make this team maybe. I mean, I discussed this with the wide receiver depth chart earlier in the week, and how 10, 11 wide receivers, and the Steelers might not keep half of them. And really, you're talking about 6, 7 guys that are competing for one spot, with really a hierarchy of certain men that have a better chance of making the squad than others. And the tight end position is no different. And you have all of these different weapons on the Steelers offense. Everyone, of course, had this spotlight on Jesse James for a short, brief period when Heath Miller retired in March. And Heath Miller just, he doesn't leave behind, like, this isn't just a guy you pull someone off the street and replace Heath Miller with just some street free agent, anybody. But what did happen was free agency opened, and probably the most coveted tight end in free agency this year in the free agent market, former San Diego Charger, gets signed to the Pittsburgh Steelers, and that was Ladarius Green. And everybody thinks pretty highly, I think, of Ladarius Green. A lot of people who follow Antonio Gates and his career in San Diego saw Green as maybe the heir apparent, and he learned behind one of the best tight ends in the game. So you have this guy coming over, and immediately you're thinking of, well, where's Le'Veon Bell in his, return from his knee injury? And you have Antonio Brown on Dancing with the Stars, and now Marcus Wheaton's in a contract year, and Sammy Coates, is coming into his second year as well. No one is talking about Jesse James. And this Steelers offense could get real interesting when you consider you have two guys. I think Ladarius Green is like 6'6", 235, 240 or so, and Jesse James is 6'7", 254. So you have these two big bodies that you could put in around the goal line, anywhere in the red zone, and you could probably play these two tight end sets, even though the Steelers are more prone to playing 11 personnel than any other sub-package that they have on the offensive side of the ball. You might see more of them just trying to create mismatches, because that's really what it's all about. You're going to attack what the other team can't defend. So if that's putting 3 wide receivers out, or even Le'Veon Bell going out in a slot, and like I said, I think Ladarius Green himself, I mentioned this in the article, I do believe, that I believe Ladarius Green can be split out wide, just like Jimmy Graham. If you remember, Jimmy Graham was used as a wide receiver quite a bit, even to the point where when it was time for the New Orleans Saints to franchise Jimmy Graham, he was ready to bring about, I don't know if it was a lawsuit, a grievance, but there was an official complaint. He wrote a letter, just like our mothers probably would have back in the day, a very stern letter. And he says, I don't want to be paid like a tight end. I want paid wide receiver money. And it caused like a major debate, because if you look where most of his passes were caught, most of his receptions and everything were coming like out of the slot. So if you think about all the exciting opportunities for Ladarius Green, and we're still talking about Ladarius Green, we're not talking about Jesse James. And we're not talking, I don't know, we might not be talking about, maybe it's just that some of us feel maybe the pressure of Heath Miller's, in Heath Miller's absence. I mean, Heath Miller is an all-time great, an Iron Man, played almost every game of every season. He missed like 1 or 2 here or there. He had that really bad injury at one point, and he never really put up fantasy football numbers. But he still ended his career as one of 12 tight ends with 6,000 or more career receiving yards. And he leaves the Steelers as the all-time receptions leader for tight ends with 592, and he's 6th most at the position in NFL history. And, he's going to get passed eventually. And he was a 2-time Pro Bowler, but he's going to get passed eventually, because you have other players out there that are starting to catch. I mean, Gronk is only getting started. You have Greg Olsen. You have a lot of these guys. You have baby Gronk like Travis Kelce. And you know what? And this wasn't my joke initially, so please, I don't want the heat from it, but it was kind of funny. I think there was, I can't remember who I can attribute this comment to. Please leave me the comment on YouTube and own it, and I'll make sure I mention it and give you a shout out the next time I have a podcast. But you mentioned calling Ladarius Green the Black Travis Kelce, and if you know, Travis Kelce, actually, I don't know if he took offense to it or not, but a lot of people were calling him Baby Gronk. So, in effect, I asked if Ladarius Green would be Black Baby Gronk. as funny as that seems. But back on the topic of Heath Miller, and I don't really want to say decline. Heath Miller was a cog in this offense. He was relied upon. He was definitely a guy that you counted on catching the ball every time it was within his grasp. He's like one of those players where if you're looking on 3rd down and that's your read, that's the guy that's going to pick you up a 1st down. Heath Miller, great in the locker room, just tremendous player all around. But we certainly saw, and I don't know this is necessarily due to his age or, age, health. All those things take tolls on football players. They take tolls on us that don't play football as well. We're not in the NFL, and let me tell you, I crawl out of bed and the back aches and everything cracks in the morning. But with Heath Miller, I really do think some of his production took a slide because he has guys named Antonio Brown on one side of him and Martavis Bryant to the other side, and even Marcus Wheaton, didn't put up the biggest numbers. And you look at Le'Veon Bell. Le'Veon Bell caught a lot of passes last year. I'm trying to remember the statistic that I saw that where he was leading in a certain, I don't know if it was yards per catch, catches, or whatever, right before he got hurt. And it was just tremendous considering he had missed some games to start the season due to suspension, and then he got exited from the season, placed on injured reserve. I think it was game 8 or game 9 of the season against the Cincinnati Bengals, as we all remember. So you have all of these weapons. You think Ladarius Green could go out in motion, or Le'Veon Bell. What will this do if the Steelers happen to run a 2 tight end set with Jesse James, and you stack Ladarius Green and Jesse James? I know we're really looking into the crystal ball here, but it's really cool to think about the possibilities that might open up, because, just like most of the rookies on the Pittsburgh's offense or defensive side of the ball, although that's going to change a lot this year on the defensive side of the ball. I'll be talking about that soon, very soon. But then I'm trying to think. The Oakland Raiders game, was that the beginning of November? And James would come into that game and score his first NFL touchdown. And for those of you who play the daily fantasy sports type deal, the Oakland Raiders, and this is the reason maybe to temper expectations a little bit with Jesse James, because the Oakland Raiders were getting torched every single week by everyone's tight end, maybe more than one tight end. They gave up ridiculous number. I think they were giving up at least 6-7 receptions, at least a score and 100 yards on average to tight ends through where the Steelers ended up playing them. And I remember with the daily fantasy deal, for those of you who don't play it, you get a certain salary cap, so certain players are more expensive than others. And, this is kind of funny because I was talking about this the last time about tight ends and bringing up Ladarius Green, because Ladarius Green made me some money last year when Antonio Gates was suspended for the first 4 games of the regular season with the Chargers. So Ladarius Green just got Phillip Rivers was just throwing the ball an insane amount of times in a game. I think he attempted like 60-some passes in the one game, and it was just those got to go to somebody. And, of course, a lot of those went to Ladarius Green. So that's why I'm excited for Ladarius Green. But you look at Jesse James, he gets a touchdown against the Raiders. I really thought Heath Miller was going to smoke that team. And it turns out that Jesse James is the beneficiary of that bad defense and secondary for that game. So James just pretty much used sparingly throughout most of the season. He had a pretty decent game where he had 5 targets and caught 3 of them for 30 yards against the Indianapolis Colts. That was the one where the Steelers, for the second year in a row, just stomped Indianapolis. That was the 45-10 game, which was pretty awesome. And James would, not do much for the rest of the season. He only has 8 catches on a total of 11 targets, 56 yards. He did have a 2-point conversion and that touchdown against the Oakland Raiders. And this is where I said that James has and we're calling him the Outlaw, which is really cool. I love that nickname, Jesse James, the Outlaw. He has a high ceiling and a low floor. And what I mean by when I say that is that with the low floor, it means if this guy does nothing more than that next year, I don't think anyone is going to lose their minds as if Antonio Brown had like 8 catches in the entire season. There were games, and Antonio Brown had like 8 catches in a game. He had like 5 catches in every single game for like at least 32 games straight. And I think we lost track of that. He had that streak going into last season. I don't remember where it ended, but Antonio Brown has a higher floor because you expect a lot more from Antonio Brown than you would Jesse James. So Jesse James, low floor. But what could come out of a season if Jesse James is, I don't want to say overachiever, because I do believe the word overachiever is misused quite a bit. And I've used it in underachiever, but it's kind of like what's your high expectation and low expectation. So high ceiling, low floor for Jesse James. The high ceiling being, hey, if this guy caught 5-6 touchdowns as a red zone target, we're going to forget about Martavis Bryant, I have a feeling. With using JJ and Ladarius Green, they're going to pick up the slack. Marcus Wheaton, Sammy Coates, Darius Hayward-Base. I mean, the Steelers would be just even more downright scary if they did have Bryant. I don't know how you cover the guys that are on the field right now. Someone had suggested in the comments on BTSC that maybe Roger Goodell will allow the defense to add an extra defender out there. Then they could play with 12, and maybe somebody could cover Antonio Brown. Certainly the Cincinnati Bengals can't cover him. They have to knock him out of a game in order to do so. So Heath Miller's numbers, going back and looking at that, he had 81 targets his way, 60 receptions, 535 yards, 2 touchdowns. I do think that's more than we could definitely expect that from Ladarius Green. Didn't mean to stutter there. It's just, it's late, watched the Pens game. I had my cousin that was down there in the chaos. Unfortunately, I couldn't go. just people everywhere. They set up a second screen in Market Square, and unfortunately, there still isn't a major championship that's actually won in the city of Pittsburgh, meaning the game was played in Pittsburgh since 1960. I believe before the Pens game, they showed Bill Mazeroski, who, of course, won in 1960 with the Pittsburgh Pirates World Series being played in Pittsburgh. So, a bit disappointing, but back on track, we want to talk about Super Bowls. And we want to talk about what the Steelers are going to end up doing. Now, I did say something about 11 personnel, and I said they ran that for 65% of their offensive plays last year. I do believe that may have been the most of anyone in the NFL. I'll have to fact check that and come and get back to you on it. And what that means is 11 personnel is one running back and one tight end. So if you're running a 12 personnel, it's one running back and two tight ends. So basically, when you're dealing with those numbers, you can figure out the math of how many wide receivers. So 11 personnel is the 3 wide receiver sets that the Steelers run. And that might work against Jesse James's favor, just in the fact that if the Steelers end up running 11 a lot like they did last season, there won't be a whole lot of reasons for James to go out there. But then again, they ran some jumbo sets. They even got Rosie Nix out there and using him as and in fact, I want to say, I'm losing. Alejandro Villanueva got quite a bit of playing time. And then, too, also a former college tight end, and, of course, ended up being the starting left tackle. But he even played in the opener against the Patriots and got in for 5-6 plays as that third jumbo-type guy. So if James can block, I'm not going to say he's the left tackle coming in, but it definitely gives you a really cool option because I'll tell you what, when you had Heath Miller and Matt Spaeth out there last season in those double tight end sets, I mean, you pretty much know that Matt Spaeth isn't going to end up catching a pass or being targeted very much. I think Spaeth, let's see, I had it right here. He has a total of 7 receptions on 10 targets in 35 games. That includes the playoffs. For the entire time he's been in Pittsburgh since he came back in 2013. And that just shows how little Matt Spaeth is used as far as a passing option in the offense. Like here or there, it's like that surprise type thing. And you saw what little like Heath Miller was used there. But now you have 2 guys that are 2 big bodies that can catch. Now you got to see if he could actually pass block and run block too, because you know what? That's where Matt Spaeth has been very valuable as a veteran tight end. That's where he earns his keep. So it's going to be very intriguing to see the upside of Jesse James this year. I do believe that combining players like Le'Veon Bell out there, even D'Angelo Williams out there, Ladarius Green, obviously, all the fast wide receivers. Todd Haley's going to figure out a way to plug Jesse James into this offense, and that's why I think that might make the Outlaw, Pittsburgh's secret weapon, an added piece of an already deadly offensive unit. Ladies and gentlemen, I want to thank you for listening. I want to thank you, too, for supporting Steel City Underground, supporting everything that I do, the other people that are connected to me, the people that I give shout-outs to. Thank you for viewing the articles, listening to the podcast. The article on Jesse James, the most viewed article on Behind the Steel Curtain. I don't know if I'm allowed to share the actual numbers. I would give them to you, but they were pretty impressive. And I don't mean to just toot my own horn because I can't do it without you. So once again, I appreciate it. Everyone, despite a Pens loss, life will go on. Be safe, be good, and I will catch you later.
We would like to thank you for listening and remind our listeners to follow us on social media and our website, www.steelcityunderground.com.